When my father passed away, he left behind a secret. A huge one, it turned out. $1,600,000, tucked away in a savings account I hadn't even known existed. His will was simple and clear, placing me, his daughter, Claire, in charge of everything. The responsibility was enormous, a final act of trust from a man I adored. My first thought, my only real instinct, was to do what felt right. I would pay off the last of the crushing medical bills that had piled up over his final months, and then, whatever was left, I'd split it evenly with my younger brother, Sean. It seemed like the only decent thing to do. After all, it was our father's money. But my husband, Daniel, saw something I didn't. That night, as I was calculating the final hospital expenses, he placed a hand on my arm, his expression serious. "Honey," he said, in a low, firm voice, "you can, and you should, split the money. But before you say one word about this inheritance to Sean, I want you to do something for me. Just send him the bill for his half of the medical expenses. See what he does." To be honest, the suggestion felt wrong, almost cynical. This was Sean, the kid I had practically raised. He was family. The idea of testing him felt like a betrayal. But I trusted my husband, and there was a quiet certainty in his gaze that made me hesitate. So, with a heavy heart, I did it. I typed up a simple, direct text message with the final amount and hit send. The response was faster than I ever imagined. That same night, my phone rang. It was Sean, but he wasn't in Chicago anymore. He and his wife, Donovan, were already on their way, halfway to my house. They'd been driving all night, he said. They walked into our quiet, grieving house just after the midnight hour. The air still smelled of funeral flowers, and the silence was thick. But before the screen door slammed shut, before anyone asked how I was doing, before a single word of the funeral arrangements was mentioned, Donovan launched into a speech that sounded rehearsed in the car. "Claire," she said, with a perfectly crafted expression of practiced sympathy, "I know we're family, but we all have our own households to maintain now. It's a different reality. Those medical bills, that's just something you and Daniel should figure out on your own." I stared at her, trying to process the words. Before I could speak, Sean, my brother, my little brother, chimed in, his eyes fixed on a spot on the floor. "Yeah, Claire, you know how hard I'm pushing to get my business off the ground. Things are tight." He added, "As my older sister, you've always been the most understanding about this stuff." I stood there in the entryway, the night's chill still clinging to their coats. The air seemed to rush out of my lungs, and a cold, sharp shock ran through my body. It was like a slap in the face. For all those months while Dad was fading away, it was Daniel and me. We were the ones making the endless hospital visits, the terrifying late-night calls, the sheer emotional effort until we were both exhausted, our lives completely on hold. I had called Sean again and again, begging him to come home, just to see Dad one last time. But he always had an excuse. The flight was too expensive, the travel too inconvenient, he couldn't sneak away from work. But $200,000 in debt. That got him in the car, burning gas all night. Daniel always told me that I spoiled him, that I had let him get away with everything his whole life. I never wanted to believe it, always defended him. But standing there, in the living room that still smelled of my father's pipe tobacco, an old saying my husband cherished kept ringing in my head, a saying I finally understood. "Blood is thicker," he used to say, "but money is thicker still." Seeing me just stand there, silent and stunned, Donovan clearly thought she had the upper hand. She pressed her advantage. "Claire, we know it's not easy for you, really, living in this small town. But $200,000 is an enormous amount for anyone. Sean nodded eagerly, piggybacking on her words as if he'd been given a cue. Exactly, I mean, Mum and Dad didn't have great incomes, but they pinched every penny for years. Surely they left some savings, right? Something to cover this? If it hadn't been for the formal process of closing his bank accounts, I never would have learned about the inheritance. My fingers were trembling. The urge to tell them, to reveal the truth, was overwhelming. But then Daniel's warning from earlier that night came to mind. Just before they arrived, he'd given me one last piece of advice. When they ask about Dad's savings, he'd said, "Be quiet for 5 seconds before you answer." He insisted it wasn't about being cruel, but about giving people the space to show you who they really are. I didn't understand it then, but in the tight, predatory silence of that room, I was beginning to. I looked down at the worn floorboards and started counting in my head. 1, 2, 3. Donovan couldn't stand the silence. She shot Sean a look of feigned exasperation. "Seriously, Sean, what are you implying? That you don't trust Claire? She's the most honest person I know. If Dad had money stashed, why would she need to call us about this bill?" Sean thought about it, staring hard at my still silent face, then nodded with a theatrical sigh of deep disappointment. "You're right. Dad was sick for a long time before this, wasn't he? I guess his savings probably got wiped out. Right, Claire?" They were fishing, so blatantly it was almost comical. I looked into Sean's probing eyes and felt a sudden, sharp pang of alienation, so profound it made me dizzy. I felt like I was looking at a complete stranger. Was this really the same boy who used to clutch my hand, his little face serious, promising that when he grew up, he'd always be the one to protect me? Sean, completely oblivious to the tectonic shift happening inside me, kept pushing his agenda. "Claire, you just don't get it. My situation is way harder than yours right now. Donovan and I are still paying the mortgage, and my business, look, it's drowning in debt. How about this? You cover my half of the bills for now, and I'll pay you back later. I swear." Before I could even respond, Donovan re-entered the room. She'd apparently been taking a quick survey of the old house. She shot Sean a look that was both scolding and sly. "Don't be such an idiot. We're family. What's all this about paying back? It's simple. We'll just give Claire our share of this house, and we'll call it even." Her logic was so twisted and self-serving I couldn't follow it at first. We were talking about a massive, immediate medical debt. What did a ramshackle old house have to do with it? It took me a second to fully untangle her reasoning. She was proposing to trade her half of the family home, our shared inheritance, as payment for their half of a $200,000 debt. I was speechless at the audacity. First, she had no right to bargain with a shared asset that wasn't even legally appraised, much less liquidated. Second, it was a dilapidated house in a dying town. Best case, if I sold it, I'd be lucky to get $40,000 or $50,000 for the whole thing. How was that going to help? I used to hold a certain, if grudging, respect for Donovan. She was educated, sophisticated, from the big city. But at that moment, standing there with a smug little smirk, all I could see was ugly, grasping greed, a calculating cunning that made my skin crawl. I refocused on Sean, needing to hear it from his lips. "So this is your plan, too? This is how you want to resolve this?" He instantly put on his most pathetic, wounded expression. "Claire, I'm being as generous as possible. I'm giving you my half of the house. I just need you to try to see things from my perspective for once." "The bills are over $200,000, I said in a cold, monotone voice. "And you call that generosity?" "But I don't have a choice," he whined, his voice taking on a childlike tone. "Besides, I'm the one who must perpetuate the family name. If Dad were alive, you know he'd want to take care of me first. It's my birthright. I stared at him as the silence stretched between us. Donovan chimed in, putting a soothing hand on my arm that I wanted to shake off. Claire, your brother is at a crucial point with his business. As the older sister, it's your duty, really, to sacrifice a little. Dad is gone now. Wouldn't it be better if we focused on our families now, so we don't hold each other back? Don't sink each other. Her words echoed in my head, and for one terrifying second, they made a twisted kind of sense. For years, while he was still living his ambitious life, I was the one at home, the good daughter, doing my duty. But had I been a good wife? A good mother? Daniel was overwhelmed between his job and his role as a surrogate son to my aging parents. My own daughter was failing school, her teachers calling me constantly while I sat in a hospital waiting room. Now that Dad was gone, maybe Donovan was right. Maybe it was time to stop letting my brother's family drag mine down into the abyss with them. The thought left me feeling hollow and cold. And it was in that cold, quiet moment that Sean slid a neatly folded document across the old wooden table. Claire, he said softly, as if doing me a favor, if you're ready, why don't we sign the agreement? I froze, staring at the paper. It was a formal, professionally drafted asset settlement agreement, which meant they had the document prepared before they even got in the car. Suddenly, everything clicked with terrifying, sickening clarity. The frantic all-night drive, the incessant questions about Dad's savings, Donovan's absurdly transparent offer to sign the house over to me. They'd always had a plan. They had come here to sniff out any available cash, and finding none, their alternative was to pull out this contract and legally sever themselves from the financial fallout of their father's death. Are you trying to disown us? I whispered, the words barely audible, catching in my throat. He actually had the decency to blush. Don't put it like that, Claire. It's just an agreement. It's business. And we're giving you the whole house, remember? He's right, Donovan added quickly, her voice breathless and brittle. Let's just get this over with. I looked at the agreement, and a new wave of despair washed over me. This wasn't a settlement. It was an ambush. The terms were breathtakingly cruel. Sean would officially relinquish his right to the old family home. In exchange, he would be legally and permanently absolved of his half of the $200,000 medical debt. And then, the final, outrageous clause. I was to pay him an additional $50,000 as compensation for the half of the property he was so generously giving me. After that, our families would go their separate ways, with no further obligations, financial or otherwise, to each other. His signature was already there, crisp and final, with a greasy, marked thumbprint pressed beside it as if to seal the deal. Sign it, Claire, Sean urged, his voice soft and persuasive. We can get a lawyer tomorrow to make it official. You think this is fair? I asked hoarsely. A minute ago, you said the house should cover the medical bills. That's a separate matter, Donovan said smoothly, cutting in before he could answer. We relinquish our right to the house. That's decided. But your brother is the future of the Becker family. He can't be left with nothing. And there it was again. The family lineage, the sacred male heir. For over a decade, he was the prodigal son, the one too important, too busy forging his career to visit more than a handful of days every few years. Now, he was the rightful heir, here to claim his due. He wouldn't shoulder the immense responsibility, but he refused to yield an inch of the payoff. How did the boy I loved turn into this monster? No, I finally exclaimed, the word tearing out of my throat. If the house is for the debt, I'm not giving you another cent. This is insane. Sean's face crumpled into a familiar, pleading expression he'd used on me since childhood. Claire, you've always taken care of me more than anyone. Couldn't you try to understand my situation? Any other time in my life, that tone of voice would have broken my heart. I would have imagined him struggling alone in a big city and remembered the sacred, unbreakable bond of siblings. But this time, I felt nothing but a bone-deep, chilling horror. Understand? He lived in a huge house, ran his own little business, and never once had to worry about the overwhelming day-to-day reality of what was happening back home. When, even for 1 second, had he ever tried to understand what I was going through? Donovan, seeing my resolve hardening, shifted tactics. Claire, let's be practical. We've already price-checked online. That house would sell for at least $100,000 in this market. Splitting it is more than fair. This woman was going to drive me completely crazy. Every move of hers was a cold calculation, every word a carefully laid trap, based on the assumption that I was a complete idiot. Seriously? I laughed, a bitter, humorless sound, surprising even myself. You think it's worth that much? Fine. Buy it. Give me $100,000 right now. How about that? You're so good with numbers. How come you didn't bother to calculate what half of the $200,000 in medical bills is? Sean's face turned red with rage as I yelled at his wife. He stepped between us, his body tense. Claire, why are you yelling at her? I stared into his blazing eyes, the eyes of a stranger, and I couldn't comprehend what I saw. Before I could answer, Donovan shoved him aside. Oh, you want to do the math? She shrieked, her voice raised to a hysterical pitch. Let's do the math, because we have some counting to do with you too. What could they possibly have to count with me? They hadn't spent a dime on our parents' care in years. Their rare, obligatory gifts were promotional trinkets, credit card presents, or supermarket freebies. Donovan had her phone in her hand, scrolling as she read a pre-written list on her notes app. When your mother was still alive, they were both getting Social Security checks every month. That adds up to a considerable amount in a year. Plus, your father had his private consulting gigs. And you were here, taking care of them. How much money do you think was flowing through this house? How much were you keeping for yourself every month? You had to play the part of the perfect, devoted daughter, but in reality you were bleeding them dry. Did you really think we were that stupid? Seeing her smug, triumphant face, I burst out laughing. I couldn't help it. It's true what they say. When anger and disbelief reach a certain point, it transforms into something else entirely. She would never believe that aside from a small gift for my wedding, I had never asked my parents for a single cent. If it wasn't for that hidden bank account I had just discovered, the weight of the medical bills would have crushed me. I looked away from her and directed my gaze at Sean, my voice dangerously calm. Did you tell her that? That I was stealing from our parents? Well, no, he snapped back, his voice thick with a sickening conceit. Don't stand there pretending you didn't take advantage of them. Did you think I wouldn't notice? You're so self-righteous. That was it. That was the final, definitive moment. My last thread of brotherly affection for him snapped and disintegrated into ashes. Tell me, I demanded, my voice shaking with a soul-deep rage. Growing up, who did this whole family fuss over? Who was the spoiled favourite child? Say it. He muttered, refusing to look me in the eye, his gaze fixed on the floor. Me. And a few years ago, when the down payment for your fancy house wasn't enough, who gave you the money you were missing? He hung his head even lower. You. You guys did. You want to add that to your list of calculations? I spat, my voice filled with contempt. Because we can stand here all night adding up every dollar I've sent you since you were a teenager. Let's do the math. He looked up then, his face burning with shame and defensive fury. I told you, Claire, I'll pay it all back. Just wait until my business takes off. He had told me those exact same words when he was in college, when I was working 2 jobs and sending him most of my paycheck so he could live comfortably and focus on his studies. He was going to pay me back. He said I was the best sister in the world. After he graduated, he only came home once every 4 years. How could he think those empty words still held any power over me? No, I said, my voice dead and monotone, cutting him off. I'm done with your promises. Sean nodded slowly, a strange expression on his face. Okay, if that's the case, then I'll see you in court. I was so startled I was sure I had misheard. You're going to sue me? After I spent the last decade of my life caring for Mum and Dad while you were absent? We tried to be reasonable with you, Donovan broke in, her voice shrill. But you won't listen to us, so what other choice do we have? I have plenty of lawyer friends, you know. Top-notch lawyers, from the best universities. A small-town person like you doesn't stand a chance of winning a case like this. She was getting more and more agitated, raising her voice with every word, until finally she balled up a copy of the agreement and threw it in my face. She jabbed a trembling finger at my nose and shrieked, "Why do you think we drove all this way? We just wanted a peaceful settlement. But you fought us every step of the way. Fine, we'll sue you. We'll drag you through the mud and the courts until you have absolutely nothing left." A pure, clean, burning fury scorched through me. Vultures. These people were vultures. And to think, just this morning, I was going to give half of my father's legacy to these creatures. I was an idiot, a complete idiot. At that moment, Sean gently pulled his wife's arm. "Donovan, let me talk to her for a moment," he said, his voice suddenly soft and reasonable. He walked over and took my hands in his face the perfect picture of sincerity. Seeing that familiar face, the one I'd loved my entire life, turned my stomach. "Claire, try to see it from my perspective," he pleaded, his eyes wide and earnest. "If you were in my shoes, what would you do?" "The old me," I said, my voice shaking with the effort of staying calm, "would have done everything I could to help you. I would have shared the burden without a second thought." He laughed, a short, condescending bark. "And that's because you're naive, Claire. That kind of thinking only sinks us all in the mud." "How?" I asked, genuinely confused by his twisted logic. "You'd be taking on a debt you can't pay. Why do you get yourself into such trouble?" he explained patiently, as if talking to a clumsy child. "This was one family's problem, our family's problem. Why are you so insistent on turning it into 2 families' problems?" And at that moment, I finally truly understood his worldview. All his education, all his years in the big city, had taught him that the fundamental principle of family help was just asking for trouble. Everything I had done, every sacrifice I had made for our parents, was just a stupid, senseless mistake in his eyes. "I'm the one who's been out in the world, under all this constant pressure," he continued, feeling he was winning me over. "And what do you think all that was for? For the future of this family. It's simple logic. Contribution and reward must be proportional. I'm the one building a legacy for the Becker name, so I deserve a greater reward. It's only fair." "He's right," Donovan added, seeing her opportunity. "And when we have children, they'll be Beckers, won't they? You wouldn't just be helping your brother, you'd be investing in the future of the entire Becker family." I don't know how a college-educated woman in the 21st century could say something so feudal and backward. But well, maybe that's the thing. Maybe a head full of books can also be filled with the most twisted, self-serving logic imaginable. But one phrase of his stuck in my mind, a single sharp point of clarity amid the chaos. Contribution and reward must be proportional. He was the smart one, the educated one, but I was no longer a fool. And are you completely certain of that? I asked, my voice now quiet and even. The more one contributes, the more one receives. Yes, he said, nodding firmly and confidently. Absolutely. I looked at the crumpled contract on the floor. Then if I sign this agreement, I asked, my voice ice cold, it's final. No regrets afterward? Donovan was vibrating with excitement. Regrets? Why would he regret it? This is the perfect solution for everyone. Sean was just as anxious, his eyes wide. No regrets, Claire, I swear. I'll even record a video for you right now as proof. A legally binding declaration. As I pulled out my phone, pretending to open the camera, a text from Daniel lit up the screen. How's it going? The lawyer said if they want to, they can split the money. I didn't know he'd gone so far as to consult with a lawyer. I had always thought suing your own family over an inheritance was the most humiliating, shameful thing in the world. This was his quiet, firm way of telling me I had options, that he was backing me up no matter what, that he didn't want me to be destroyed in the middle of this nightmare. But seeing the two greedy, desperate people in front of me, I no longer felt like sharing anything with them. As I started to type a reply to my husband, Donovan shrieked, "Aha! I knew it. She's still trying to get us to pay the medical bills." I looked up, completely baffled at how she'd jumped to that conclusion. She grabbed Sean's arm, pointing an accusing finger at my phone. I just saw it. A text from her husband. They've hired a lawyer. They're talking about splitting the money. Sean completely blew up. I can't believe it, he yelled at me, his face contorted in wounded fury. You've been stalling this whole time, dragging this out while you waited for your lawyer to tell you what to do, haven't you? I had no explanation for them. And frankly, I didn't have the energy to find one. I was sick of it all. Donovan snatched the phone out of my hand before I could react. Oh no, you're not texting anyone. You want to call in reinforcements? Fine. We can call in reinforcements too. She immediately dialed a number on her own phone, screaming, "Get up here, now! They're trying to pull something." Less than 2 minutes later, there was a loud, heavy banging on the door. It wasn't knocking. Someone was violently kicking the door. I was terrified. That was not the sound of someone coming to talk. Sean rushed to open it, and a burly man, Donovan's cousin, stormed into the house. He pointed a meaty finger at me and roared, "You've been messing with my sister. I swear to God, if you touch her, I'll kill you." You brought her cousin with you? I asked Sean, my heart pounding hard. It's called being smart, being prepared, he yelled, his face red with adrenaline. I didn't want it to come to this, but you forced my hand. The man was holding a tire iron and looking at me as if he wanted to use it. This is your last chance, Claire, Donovan said, her voice dangerously low and firm. Are you signing this agreement or not? I just stared, paralyzed by shock and fear. With a subtle nod from her, the cousin brandished the iron bar, bringing it down with a deafening, sickening crash onto our old glass coffee table. The table where Dad used to sit every morning with his tea. The sound of the glass shattering echoed the sound of my own heart breaking into 1,000 pieces. Are you insane? I shrieked, finding my voice. What gives you the right to destroy things in this house? I swear I'm calling the police and having you arrested right now. The cousin sneered at me. Sean told us all about you, how you like to kick people when they're down. He knows you better than anyone. Said sometimes you just need to get rough to make people like you see reason. My whole body was shaking with rage as I turned to Sean. You let a stranger threaten me in my own home, and you have the nerve to accuse me of kicking you when you're down. Sean's face was burning with shame, but before I could say more, he roared, Am I wrong, Claire? If you cared even a little, you'd help me out. You'd sign the paper. He snatched the crumpled agreement off the floor and shoved it in my face, his hand trembling. Sign it so we can move on with our lives. Is it that hard? And just like that, my heart turned to ice. I felt as if 1,000 tiny shards of glass were stabbing me. The little brother I had adored, the child I had protected and loved my entire life, was gone. He had become a selfish, worthless, parasitic creature, and I no longer wanted a parasite for a brother. In a strange, perverse way, I suddenly felt a wave of profound relief. I was thankful. If it hadn't been for Daniel's gentle, persistent caution, I would have handed half a fortune over to this monster. A bitter, humorless smile stretched across my lips. Okay, if that's what you want, I'll sign the agreement. Sean and Donovan exchanged a look of startled, disbelieving relief. Claire, please don't hold a grudge, Sean said quickly, his voice instantly softening. I'm only doing this for the sake of our family. I hope you understand. I let out a long, slow exhale. Oh, I understand. I'll sign. Donovan was beaming. She rushed over, her voice suddenly sugary sweet. Claire, I know my cousin was a little rough earlier. I'm so sorry. We'll buy you a new coffee table in a few years, I promise. Sean carefully smoothed the paper on the only remaining intact end table and handed me a pen. Here, Claire, he said, pointing to the blank line in the bottom left corner of the page. Sign here. There are 2 copies. He licked his lips, his eyes gleaming with avid, desperate anticipation. I looked at the agreement one last time, then pretended to consider it for a moment, tapping the pen against my chin. Wait, I said, looking up at them. I'll sign, but I have one condition. They were so close to getting everything they wanted. They both tensed up, their smiles frozen on their faces, asking in unison what my condition was. I keep the house, I said, my voice clear and firm. And you give me $50,000. That's right. He wasn't going to get a single cent. In fact, before this was over, I was going to force him to pay me. Donovan's face instantly clouded over, her expression thunderous. Are you insane? She hissed. We have to give you money now. Sean was just as bewildered. Claire, what is this? This whole argument has been about the 50,000. I'm already giving you the house. Why should I pay you too? When a woman's heart finally breaks for good, there is no more hesitation or doubt. And my heart was shattered. At that moment, I knew exactly what this parasite in front of me was thinking, and I knew exactly what he was afraid of. When you bought your house a few years ago, I said, my voice like steel, I don't know how much Mom and Dad gave you, but I personally gave you $50,000 from my savings. Is that right? He nodded timidly and reluctantly. And ever since you were a child, through 4 years of college, all the money I gave you for tuition, books, living expenses, that must be at least another $50,000, right? I continued, pressing my advantage. In total, you owe me over $100,000. How exactly were you planning to pay me back? The others in the room, even Donovan's burly cousin, turned to stare at Sean. I can't believe you're keeping a running tally, he said with an exasperated sigh. I told you I'll pay you back when I make it big. You just have to be patient. No more patience, I said. No more waiting. We're settling it. Right here, right now. Hearing this, Sean hesitated, his mind clearly racing. Seeing his indecision, I pressed my advantage with a dismissive, casual shrug. Of course, if you don't like the deal, we can always switch things up. Switch what? Donovan asked nervously, staring back and forth between us. I smiled smugly. I'll be the one to keep everything. You take the house, and in exchange, you cover the $200,000 medical debt. No, that's not happening, Donovan instantly yelled. No way. Just, just give us a minute. Let's talk this over for a second. The three of them huddled in a corner of the room, whispering furiously for what felt like an eternity. Finally, Sean came back toward me, a sickly, forced smile on his face. He said they'd talked it over and agreed to my terms, but they wanted to add one final condition. I knew exactly what condition they were going to add, and I agreed without a second's hesitation. The next day, urged on by Sean and his increasingly impatient family, we went to a law office to officially certify the modified agreement. Daniel, ever cautious, made sure to bring along a few of his burly friends from work. After signing, sealing, and certifying the documents, Sean, looking pained, transferred $50,000 into my bank account. As soon as he had the money, his demeanor completely changed. The facade of the aggrieved brother vanished entirely. "This is great," he cheerfully told Donovan, a wide, genuine smile on his face. "From now on, we can finally go our separate ways. No more holding back." "I think it's great too," I said sincerely, "because now I won't have to share my father's secret savings with these two parasites." Sean stuffed his copy of the agreement into his pocket and gave me a look of disdain. "Well, goodbye, Claire. Or rather, good riddance." Donovan was already dragging him toward the door, practically skipping. "Why waste your energy on her? It's over. Let's go home. I'm taking a nice, long 3-hour hot bath." The money was in my account. The legally binding agreement was in my purse. I had nothing to lose and nothing to hold back. "Have a nice life," I called out to them with a cold, piercing smile. "And I guess Dad's $1.6 million inheritance is no longer any of your business." I simply had to let them know. I needed them to understand the magnitude of their own stupidity. Just as I expected, Sean stopped dead in his tracks at the door, his back rigid. "Wait," he said to Donovan, his voice suddenly strained. "Did she just say 1.6 million?" Donovan laughed and playfully punched his arm. "Are you so obsessed with money you're starting to hear things? Your dad was broke, Sean. Where would he get $1,600,000? But Sean looked deeply uneasy. "Yeah? I'm sure that's what she said. I heard her." Donovan's smile faded. She spun on her heel and rushed toward me, her eyes wide. "What did you just say? Dad had $1.6 million?" I simply smiled and nodded slowly and deliberately. She tried to act calm, to regain control. "I get it. You're just trying to make us angry because you lost. It's really pathetic, you know." I reached into my bag and pulled out the official, notarized bank statement I had prepared, tossing it onto the table in front of her. "You're the genius, the one who's always so smart," I said with contempt. "Why don't you take a look?" Sean rushed back and snatched the paper off the table. His hand was trembling so badly, the paper rattled loudly in the silent room. They both stared at the numbers, their faces pale as stone. Sean's voice was a ragged, shaky whisper. "What is this? Dad? Dad? How could he possibly have $1,600,000 saved?" I sighed, allowing myself a small, sad shake of the head. "I don't know either. He never mentioned it to me. When I found out, my first thought, my sincere first thought, was to share it with you. But Daniel thought I should send you the medical bill first, just to see what you would do." He stood there, stunned, his gaze flicking from the bank statement to my face and back again, unable to process the reality of what he had done. "This is impossible," he stammered, shaking his head. "You're just trying to play games with us. You've been plotting against us this whole time. It was a setup. I've spent my life treating you like the most important person in the world," I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. "You're the ones who came to my house with a pre-written contract. You're the ones who have been plotting. But it doesn't matter anymore, does it? We have no relationship now. Let's stop holding back, as you suggested. I turned to leave. At that exact moment, Donovan let out a blood-curdling bestial scream. She ripped her own copy of the agreement out of her designer handbag and, in a fit of rage, tore it into tiny, fluttering pieces. "You can't leave," she shrieked, her voice catching in a hysterical sob. "We don't accept this agreement. It's null and void." Everyone in the lawyer's office stared at her in astonishment as she completely unraveled. Donovan ran toward the poor, bewildered lawyer, grabbing his arm. "This is a fraud. She committed contractual fraud. We didn't know about the $1.6 million. The agreement isn't valid. We're signing a new one. We demand a new agreement now." Seeing her completely lose control, I almost felt a twinge of pity. So I decided to help her one last time. I walked over, pulled out my copy of the agreement, pristine and intact, and slowly waved it in front of her face. "I have a copy too. Tearing up yours doesn't do a thing." She stared at it, her teeth clenched in a furious snarl, and lunged for it, but I easily pulled it away. Then I pulled out my phone. "And let's not forget the extra condition you insisted on adding last night, okay?" The night before, after their frantic, whispering huddle, they had agreed to my terms. But they added one brilliant condition: that I must officially and legally sever my relationship with Sean. It was a cold, calculated move on their part. They were so afraid that I would come after them in the future for the tens of thousands of dollars I had loaned him over the years that they wanted to break things off for good. Of course, I had no objections. I gleefully signed the disinheritance agreement, and I video recorded the whole thing with their enthusiastic consent. I pressed play on this video and turned the volume up all the way so everyone in the office could hear. On the screen, Sean proudly held up his ID to the camera. "I, Sean Becker," he declared loudly, his voice full of conviction, "hereby willingly sever all family ties with my sister, Claire Marsal, and relinquish all right to inherit any assets from our father. I have no objection to her inheriting any property. From this day forward, there will be no financial transactions between us. I swear to God, and if I break this oath, may he have no mercy on my soul." The room was completely silent. Everyone now understood exactly what had transpired. A wave of scornful looks turned toward Sean and Donovan. The sound of his own voice, speaking that final, damning oath, set Donovan completely off. She rushed over to Sean and slapped him hard. "Why did you have to record a video?" Donovan shrieked. "Why did you have to be so dramatic, so absolute?" Sean, furious, shoved her away hard. "It was your idea to cut ties. Yours. I never would have thought of it. I was just trying to make it official. To protect us." "Well, it's official now, isn't it?" Donovan cried through tears, her voice ragged with anguish. "And so is the $1.6 million. She lunged at him again, scratching at his face with her perfectly manicured nails, leaving deep, bloody trails in her wake. He ignored the pain and lunged at me. "Claire, my dear sister," he pleaded, his face a desolate, desperate picture of repentance. "You can't do this to me. Please, you can't." "What relationship do we have?" I asked coldly, looking at him. "We have no relationship. You made sure of that yourself." He started slapping himself hard, again and again. "I was just saying stupid thing. It didn't mean anything." "Please, Claire. That's not what you were saying a few minutes ago when you were telling me good riddance," I reminded him. "You couldn't wait to be rid of me forever. Since that's the case, we're strangers. And now, this stranger is leaving." In one last, pathetic act of desperation, Sean hung his head and started to sob, shaking. "Claire, I was a fool. I know it now. You've always been the one who loved me the most. For all the years we were brother and sister, please, I beg you, forgive me just this once." Seeing his tear-streaked, bleeding face, I felt nothing but that deep, heartbreaking coldness from before. "Don't you dare talk to me about our relationship," I said, my voice low and firm. "For years, it was because of that relationship, because of my love for you, that I let you walk all over me. I thought my kindness would be met with kindness, but I only made myself a fool. Sean, I'm telling you right now, so you fully understand, I will not give you a single cent of my father's inheritance. Nothing you do or say will ever change that." Panicked, Donovan and her burly cousin moved to block the door. She pointed a trembling finger at me, her face red and blotchy from crying. "You're a wicked shrew. Your brother is the only one who can perpetuate the Becker name. You have no right to hoard the family fortune." Even now, after all this, she was trying to claim the moral high ground with that ridiculous, archaic, sexist nonsense. She seemed to think it would win the onlookers' compassion, but the only reactions she got were cold, disgusted stares. "What century are you living in?" I asked, my voice ragged. "Was all that expensive education of yours completely wasted? I don't care. You're not leaving today unless you agree to change the agreement." "Get out of my way," I snapped, my patience gone. Good dogs know not to block the path. Enraged, Donovan raised her hand to slap me, but before she could connect, I slapped her hard across the cheek first. The sound echoed in the silent room. She was a princess in her own family, probably never been hit in her pampered life. She just stood there, her hand on her cheek, her eyes wide in shock, completely stunned. I smiled, a faint, humorless smile. "Does it hurt? Maybe next time you'll think twice before you start living in a fantasy world." She snapped out of her shock and started screaming like a maniac, urging her cousin to attack me. But before either of them could move, Daniel and his friends had him on the floor. They picked him up by the hair and gave him a few solid, satisfying punches, retribution for my father's coffee table. "You thought you could get away with it, didn't you?" Daniel said, standing over him, his voice dangerously quiet. "You were real tough last night when you were smashing an old man's furniture, weren't you?" The cousin, his nose bloody and swollen, whimpered on the floor. It turned out Donovan was a complete paper tiger. The only reason she behaved with such toughness and belligerence was because she had never met anyone who stood up to her. Now that she was outnumbered, she immediately retreated, resorting to empty, impotent threats. "This is fraud. You knew about the $1.6 million and you didn't disclose it. That's illegal." "Then sue me," I said, turning my back on them for the last time. "You have all those lawyer friends, right? Tell them to have me arrested." And I walked out of that office, leaving them all standing there in the ruins of their own greed. They weren't done, of course. They would never give up that easily. Once they realized I wouldn't budge, wouldn't give them a single cent, they launched a vicious harassment campaign. They brought people to the old house to cause trouble, spray painting vile insults on the front door, accusing me of abandoning my family duties to hoard the inheritance. They even created a bunch of manipulative short videos, which they posted on every social media outlet they could find, calling for a public crusade against my crimes. I didn't even bother to respond. The truth always comes out. The videos first circulated among our old neighbors, but they all knew the real story. They knew I was the one who had cared for our parents for over a decade, while Sean was nowhere to be found. They knew he was just bitter and greedy for the money. They started flooding the comments with the real story, and soon other people online joined in, turning public opinion against them dramatically. I wasn't standing around doing nothing during that time either. I used to think suing your own family over an inheritance was the most shameful thing to do. Now I understand that there's no shame in fighting for what is legally and morally yours. The real stupidity lies in being a doormat, in silently accepting abuse. I knew Sean and Donovan were educated people and would use every trick possible, so I dedicated my free time to studying everything I could about probate law. I also hired a professional, experienced lawyer who gave me valuable advice based on the specifics of my situation. Just as I expected, when the public harassment campaign failed miserably, Sean officially filed a lawsuit against me, demanding his share of the inheritance. By the time the case finally went to trial, months later, Sean looked gaunt and exhausted, an empty shadow of his former self. I had no idea what had happened to him in the intervening months, but it had clearly taken a toll. In the courtroom, he acted pitiful for the judge, crying as he explained his version of events, how he had been cruelly deceived. My sister hid the existence of the inheritance and forced me to sign an agreement that not only left me with nothing, but also forced me to pay her $50,000, he sobbed, tears streaming down his face. This is a clear case of contractual fraud. That agreement is invalid, and I demand the court grant me my rightful share of the inheritance, at least $1 million. He played the victim wonderfully, crying buckets for everyone in the courtroom to see. In response, I presented the video he had recorded himself. First, I clearly declared to the court, I said, I no longer have a sibling relationship with this person. I don't know him. And second, regardless of the validity of any previous agreement, I will not give him a single cent of my father's inheritance. Sean flew into a rage, jumping to his feet and yelling that he was the heir to the Becker family and how dare I deny him his birthright. Someone who had the means to care for his parents, but chose to ignore them, who repeatedly refused to help pay his father's final medical bills, has an incredible nerve to talk about his family name here, I said, with a clear, confident voice I never knew I possessed. Sean, in over a decade, you spent less than 1 week in your hometown. Whenever this family faced difficulties, you pretended not to be a part of it. I was the one here, caring for our parents. What gave you the confidence to demand anything? I presented a mountain of evidence to back up my claims: bank statements, hospital records, letters. Many of our old neighbors even offered to testify on my behalf, telling the court what they had witnessed over the years. Sean, on the other hand, had nothing. His only proof of his involvement in our parents' lives consisted of a few supermarket gift receipts and a record of about a dozen brief phone calls over 10 years. The judge looked at the pathetic pile of evidence with an expression that mixed confusion and disappointment. "What was your reasoning?" he asked Sean in a tired voice. "I have to forge a career in the city," Sean sobbed, as if it were the most obvious answer in the world. "To create a better life for the next generation. I don't have time to come home for every little thing. That's why my sister had to be the one to make the sacrifice. We have different roles in life, a different division of labor. It's natural, isn't it?" "Then why," the judge asked, his voice dangerously low, "are you now demanding more than half of the inheritance?" "Because my parents always loved me more," Sean said, suddenly regaining his confidence. "And I'm the most educated and successful person in the family. I'm a man. I have more expenses. Of course, I should receive at least half, if not more." The judge gaped. He looked at Sean in utter disbelief. "Are we talking about the same case?" he asked, completely exasperated. The final verdict was decisive and brutal. The court determined that, emotionally and morally, Sean had deliberately neglected his parents for years and had refused to take his most basic responsibilities after his father's death. Legally, the father had granted me full and exclusive authority over the inheritance in writing, and Sean, willingly and with full knowledge, had signed a notarized agreement relinquishing all his rights. Therefore, the court ruled that Sean had no right to the inheritance. He was not satisfied, of course. After the hearing, he and Donovan cornered me outside the courthouse, promising to appeal and fight until the very end. And so, the legal battle dragged on for almost another year. During the appeal process, I gathered even more evidence, this time of all the financial support I had personally given Sean over the years, from college tuition to his house down payment. When we returned to court for the appeal, I filed a counterclaim, demanding he pay it all back. The final ruling not only upheld the original verdict, but the judge, looking at the mountain of new evidence, also ordered Sean to pay me back $60,000 of his personal debt. It was during this time that Sean's carefully constructed life totally and utterly fell apart. It turned out that some of what he had told me about his financial struggles was true. He really was under a lot of pressure. His company owed a considerable amount of money to its suppliers, but he had been stringing them along for months, using his facade of success and ostentatious lifestyle to convince them he was profitable. But somehow, news of our family's long, nasty legal battle reached his suppliers' ears. They found out that this supposed successful entrepreneur, who claimed to have a daily cash flow of tens of thousands, had been fighting his own sister in court for over a year, all because he refused to pay his share of his father's medical bills. His credibility was instantly shattered overnight. The suppliers, sensing the ship was sinking, started calling in their debts all at once, and his company's cash flow instantly dried up, leading to the entire business going bankrupt. Facing imminent lawsuits from his creditors, Donovan, ever pragmatic, convinced him to file for a fake divorce to protect their assets. But in all their clever calculations, the one person they miscalculated was his own wife. The fake divorce turned out to be very, very real. As soon as the papers were signed, Donovan and her family took everything and kicked him to the curb. Sean was left with a mountain of crushing debt, a complete pariah. To escape his creditors, he lived as a fugitive, hiding and running, until finally he had no choice but to return to his hometown. When I saw him again, he was rail-thin, his clothes hanging off his skeletal body, as if he hadn't eaten in days. He fell to his knees on the dusty floor of the old house, sobbing and choking on his words, begging for my forgiveness, admitting how wrong, how terribly wrong he had been. He said he wasn't asking for $1 million anymore. He just needed $10,000 to survive, just to get back on his feet. Watching his pathetic, broken state, I felt a pang of something, maybe pity. "Even though we're not brother and sister anymore," I said, my voice softer than I expected, "seeing you like this, I do want to help you." Sean was ecstatic, banging his head against the floor, thanking me over and over for my mercy, for my grace. I sighed and shook my head regretfully. "But I really can't give you that $10,000. He stared at me, his eyes vacant and confused. "Why?" he whispered. I took out my phone and played the video for him one last time. His own voice, full of arrogance and certainty, echoed in the silent, empty house. "No financial dealings between us. If I break this oath, may God have no mercy on my soul." I looked at him, at the remains of the man he had become. "See," I said softly, "it was your own rule, your own oath. I'm just trying to protect you. I can't give you the money, Sean, because I don't want you to be cursed because of me." He stared at the screen, a choked, rasping sound coming from deep in his chest. Then he coughed a violent, ugly gush of blood onto the dusty floorboards, and his eyes rolled back as he slumped unconscious. When the story got out, most of the neighbors said I had done the right thing, that he got what he deserved. But a few others, the self-proclaimed enlightened ones, would take me aside and tell me I was heartless, that it was truly cruel for a sister to be so merciless to her own brother. I don't even bother to explain myself to them anymore. But I will say this to anyone who will listen. To anyone who keeps giving and giving until it hurts, who keeps making excuses for those who wronged them, kindness has to have a limit. Family has to have a limit. Because when you let someone walk all over you, when you let them treat you like you're worth nothing in the name of love or family, the only person you can blame in the end is yourself.